Welcome back to all our viewers here on Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Mike Pache. Great to have you back here with us as we continue to bring you some of the day's biggest top stories and headlines. Well, one of the big ones is the new sanctions from the U.S. to Russia in an effort to pressure the Kremlin as the war in Ukraine continues to rage on. I want to bring you the latest report from Fox News' Jackie Heinrich with this update.
This will be one of the largest sanctions that we have done against the Russian Federation.
It appears the carrot wasn't working, and President Trump has picked up the stick. The Treasury announcing new sanctions on Russian oil companies and calling on Moscow to immediately agree to a ceasefire, also urging allies from NATO, Europe, Australia, and the G7 to join in. Secretary Besson acknowledging President Trump wasn't happy with the Alaska summit and by canceling Budapest avoided a repeat.
President Putin has not come to the table in an honest and forthright manner, as we'd hope.
But the president maintains his belief Putin wants peace. Why do you still believe that?
I think they want peace. I think they both want peace at this point. It's been, it's almost 4 years.
Zelensky pointing to an overnight drone attack on a kindergarten as a sign Putin has no intention of stopping. Congress eager to act on sanctions as soon as Trump gives the green light. The bipartisan bill already has 85 votes in the Senate.
It's important that we work in conjunction with the White House, and that's why the delay. Until Putin feels the bite of sanctions or some cost that he is no longer willing to pay, he's not going to come to the table.
NATO's Secretary General backing up the president.
I have total confidence in President Trump, and he's the only one who can get this done. He is the leader of the most powerful nation on earth.
Overseas, the VP and Secretary of State working to keep the fragile ceasefire on track amid concern Israel is skeptical about the ability to implement next steps, giving this warning.
When it comes to Israel's security, we do what we have to do. That's always the case. That's not a question.
The U.S. touting progress and vowing to stay involved.
We have a very, very tough task ahead of us. I think that we've, even in the past 24 hours, had a lot of good conversations with our friends in the Israeli government, but also, frankly, with our friends in the Arab world who are stepping up and volunteering to play a very positive role in this.
After saying just yesterday there'd been no decision on Tomahawks, the president seemed to dismiss the possibility of sending them. Speaking to reporters just now in the Oval Office, he said it'll take 6 months to a year to learn how to use them. That would be too far in the future, and the U.S. will not be teaching other countries how to operate those weapons. At the White House, Jackie Heinrich, Fox News.
All right, Jackie, thanks so much for that update. I just want to play out just a little bit more of President Trump talking about the sanctions inside the Oval today.
Today is a very big day in terms of what we're doing. Look, these are tremendous sanctions. These are very big. Those are against their two big oil companies, and we hope that they won't be on for long. We hope that the war will be settled. We just answered having to do with the various forms of missiles and everything else that we're looking at, but we don't think that's going to be necessary. We would like to see them just take the line that has been formed over quite a long period of time and go and let's, go home. Last week they had almost 8,000 soldiers killed. Many Russians were killed last week. Many Ukrainians were killed last week. We think it's ridiculous and would like to have it end today.
All right. We want to continue to talk about this right now for you here on Live Now from Fox. Obviously, President Trump wants that war in Ukraine to end, but there has been many bumps along the way, and now these new sanctions adding a new moment here in this escalating war that has continued for quite some time. So I want to bring in our next guest to help break it all down here for us on Live Now from Fox. This is, please welcome Eddie Fishman. He is the author of a new book titled Choke Points, American Power in the Age of Economic Warfare. He's also a Columbia University professor and senior research scholar at the Center of Global Energy Policy and a former Russia and Europe sanctions lead at the U.S. State Department. So, Eddie, thanks so much for joining us on Live Now from Fox. Great to have you on. And first off, what did you think of the latest sanctions that are going against Russia?
This is a really significant move, Mike. Since the very beginning of Trump's second term, so since January 20th, Trump has been unwilling to impose any new sanctions on Russia. I think the perception amongst the international market, as well as many analysts, was that Trump maybe just wasn't willing to impose any new pressure on Russia. But today, these are really the biggest sanctions we've seen on Russia, not just obviously in Trump's term, but really in the last several years, probably since the very beginning of the war with the initial phase of sanctions in March of 2022. The reason these sanctions are such a big deal is that they target the two biggest oil companies in Russia, Rosneft and Lukoil. Rosneft itself was probably the most significant Russian company that was not yet under US sanctions. So this has been sort of a gaping hole in the sanctions program since 2022. And thankfully, the US has closed that. What that means, though, I think is going to depend a lot on what are the next steps that the Trump administration takes.
You know, that's such a good point there. And really, when we're thinking about the timeline and how you said there that President Trump has put this off for so long because he was hoping that somehow, some way, that there would be just a deal done here. We saw what happened in Alaska, and we saw the Budapest meeting just fall apart there. Is this an act of revenge from President Trump to say, okay, now the gloves are coming on?
Look, I think that the key to trying to actually get Putin to agree to some sort of meaningful and just peace is to persuade him that time is not on his side. The problem that Trump has had, even though he's definitely tried to get a peace deal since he's come back to the White House in January, is that Putin has believed that he's better off by continuing to fight rather than negotiating in good faith. And that's because on the battlefield, Putin has been making steady but slow gains. Whereas economically, his economy is not doing very well, but it's not been imminently on the brink of collapse. I think what the sanctions today show is that Trump is trying to change that calculus, trying to show Putin that the longer he fights this war, not only is the military side going to be difficult, but his economy really is at risk of falling into a major crisis. I want to be clear. The entire reason Russia's economy is standing is because they're still selling 5 million barrels of crude oil on global markets every single day. If Trump can get that number down substantially, the Russian economy is going to be in a massive world of hurt, and that's going to make it harder for Putin to actually seriously fight this war moving forward.
And Eddie, during the first involvements here, when it was President Biden that was putting the sanctions on Russia in the very beginning here of the war, how was Russia able to survive all those sanctions and continue this war?
So I think Biden really set almost an impossible goal for himself in 2022. Because what he tried to do was, on the one hand, to maximize pain on Russia's economy, but on the other, to leave the main cash cow of Russia's economy, which is its oil exports, effectively untouched. So Biden maximized sanctions on the Russian banking sector, on the Russian defense sector, on Russian technology companies, but he did not impose sanctions on Russian oil, right? We didn't see Rosneft, again, which is the most important company in Russia, under sanctions until today. And the war's been going on now for well over 3 years. The reason for that was, if you remember the context in 2022, global oil prices were above $100 a barrel in the early phase of the war. And we had inflation here in the United States at over 7%. That was a 4-decade high. Right now, the economic situation is very different. Oil prices have been very low, stubbornly low in a way, but barely budging above the low 60s. And inflation in the United States has come down substantially since 2022. So I think Trump now has a lot more leeway macroeconomically to impose serious pressure on Russia than Biden had in 2022, just from a political and economic standpoint.
What about, though, Eddie, is there worry, though, that now the talks could even break down even further, that these sanctions are being put in? And do you think now that, is there any coming back from this? Can you put the sanctions in and then say, you know what, maybe 4 months down the road, can you say, all right, we want to talk again? Or is that really starting to break up the nature here of some of these talks?
Look, I think even if the talks were to stop for some period of time, that's fine, because the talks were going nowhere. I mean, even if you look at the Alaska summit, it's clear Trump was not happy with it. It's because, you remember, going into that summit, what Trump was saying is, we need a ceasefire right now. And Putin came to that summit saying, we're not agreeing to a ceasefire. We're going to keep fighting. We think we can win the war on the battlefield. So, Trump, I think, has been reaching out an olive branch time and time again to Putin, and Putin's just been slapping it away. And so I think it's past time, frankly, for Trump to take a step like today, even if talks stop. I mean, we want to be engaging in these talks from a position of strength, with the Russian economy on the brink of collapse, with the Russian military coming under serious pressure from a well-armed Ukrainian opposition. That's what we want. We don't want to be negotiating from a position of weakness. And look, if you look at the way Trump has dealt with other countries, when he's had no problem with China, for instance, imposing substantial tariffs and export controls at the same time that he's negotiating a trade deal, for whatever reason, Russia's been an outlier. He's been unwilling to do any new sanctions while he's been negotiating. I think it's very reasonable for him to be imposing plenty of sanctions, providing more arms and military assistance to the Ukrainians at the same time that he's pursuing peace between Russia and Ukraine.
And Eddie, you put this out on X. I want to talk about this as well. You made a great point there, talking about the big step, but also just the follow through and what this could mean for the secondary sanctions on banks, UAE traders, and Indian refineries. Tell us a little bit about that and your thinking about these really secondary sanctions.
Yeah, so to be clear, the U.S. does not buy any oil from Russia, right? So the U.S. companies are not buying oil from Rosneft or Lukoil. The reason that these sanctions are significant, the reason that it's so important to sanction a company like Rosneft, is that what that means now is any other company that trades with Rosneft. So say you're a Chinese bank that's transacting with Rosneft, or a UAE oil trader who's buying an oil shipment from Rosneft. You yourself now could face U.S. sanctions because Rosneft has been sanctioned. So that is what secondary sanctions are. The key right now is, are these companies, are the Chinese refineries and banks and the Indian refineries and the Emirati oil traders, are they going to be nervous now that if they keep dealing with Rosneft, they might be hit with U.S. sanctions? Because if so, they're going to think twice before dealing with Russian oil. Because although, of course, buying cheap oil from Russia is very appealing for an oil refinery in India, they can't afford to lose access to the U.S. financial system. The dollar to this day remains the lifeblood of the global economy. And if you're a big refinery or a big bank, even in China or India, you can't afford to be totally cut off from the dollar.
All great points there. Eddie Fishman, great to have you on Live Now from Fox. We love to continue to talk to you all about this and really the future of what this war looks like. Great to have you on, and thanks so much for all of your input and analysis. We always appreciate it.
My pleasure. Good to see you.
You too.